This episode's brought to you by The Perfect Gene. Go to theperfectgene.nyc and use the code DAN15 for a special offer, and stay tuned after the episode for more info. Hello everybody, and welcome to my review of Squid Game 2, which hit Netflix on the day after Christmas. I'm going to be giving my thoughts on the whole season, which means that from here on out there will be spoilers ahead because it's really hard to talk about this season without getting into the specifics of what happens and what I liked and what I didn't like. So if you haven't seen Squid Game Season 2, go watch it and then come back to this review. I'll give you a couple minutes to click away before I jump into what I thought. So if you get into specifics, there are lots of things that I really liked about Season 2, which we're going to talk about. But on an overall sense, I would say that Squid Game 2 had a lot of really good parts, but parts that didn't really add up to anything. And a lot of times when I talk about my main criticism of the season, which is that it's not a full story, it's not even close to a full story, people will ask me why I sometimes criticize a movie or a show for splitting things up into separate parts and don't criticize other movies or shows for doing the same thing. This season is a great example of splitting things into parts in a way that's very unsatisfactory. I was surprised when I heard that we were going to get Squid Game Season 3 in less than a year from the release of Squid Game Season 2, because there was 3 years between the release of the first and second season. But now I'm really not so surprised because Squid Game 2 isn't really Squid Game 2. It's just the first half of the last part of the story. And if you're going to do that, if you're going to take one story and carve it up into different parts, you have to have each part provide a satisfying arc. It's something that I think the Lord of the Rings movies did very well. Yes, it is one big story, but each one of those movies tells a sub-story that has its own beginning, middle, and end. So when you get to the end of Fellowship of the Ring or Two Towers, you feel like the characters have been on a very specific journey from beginning to end, and it's not like you're leaving a whole lot hanging. Yes, there's stuff that's unresolved, but it still feels satisfying, and I didn't get that at all with Squid Game 2. Basically, none of the storylines have been resolved, and it just feels like they arbitrarily took a point and cut it in half. At the end of the season, we don't know what happens to the contestants, or to the key ones who revolted, or to Jun-ho and his team, or why Inho, the frontman, inserted himself into the game, or what the potential consequences of Gi-hun's revolt are going to be, or why anything with Noel was important. The story just stops in the middle. And again, that's not me saying that you can't leave things unresolved if you're splitting things up into parts, but you can't leave the entire thing unresolved, or people are going to be, I think rightly, a little let down. Is Squid Game 2 compelling? I'd say yes, it is. But is it satisfying? I would say absolutely no. If I were Squid Game 2's teacher, I would mark it as incomplete because there wasn't even an attempt to give us a resolution point. Again, if the plan is to split it up into two parts. If you were going to structure the season the way that it is, I think that Squid Game 2 should have been advertised as Squid Game 2 Part 1. I think that would have managed expectations from the audience a little better. It's a little bit of what Across the Spider-Verse ran into, where I think if it had kept the original Part 1, Part 2 naming convention, people would have known a little bit more what to expect. Although I don't think that Across the Spider-Verse was as egregious in the splitting of its story as Squid Game 2 was, because I think they did resolve certain things and certain things for Miles in a way that we didn't see in this season. However, there was still a lot to like in Squid Game 2, so let's go through some of that. First of all, I loved where Gi-hun went after Season 1, devoting his huge resources to hunting down the people who run the game, systematically searching the train stations, looking for the recruiter. It was a really great way to dive back into the world, and the search for the recruiter culminated in, I think, a great final scene to Episode 1, where he and Gi-hun play Russian roulette. It was tense and also filled with underlying symbolism, with the recruiter daring Gi-hun to admit that he's nothing more than a degenerate who got lucky, and Gi-hun daring the recruiter to admit that he's nothing but a dog on his master's leash. Lee Jung-jae will get the lion's share of acclaim for his acting in the season, and rightfully so, but I want to give a quick shout out to Gong Yoo and his performance in this first episode, because the two of them really created a great way to kick off this second season of Squid Game with their confrontation at the end of Episode 1. Episode 2 is where I started to suspect that maybe the season might not be as complete as I'd anticipated, because by the end, we're just getting Gi-hun back in the game, and not really in the game, getting ready to go back in the game. The whole story with Noel and the sick little girl took a lot of time in this episode, and honestly, she's a character who I thought I knew the motivation of, but I'm not really sure about now, and I'm interested at least to see what the payoff there is. This is also the episode where Gi-hun starts talking about going after the money men, the fat cats, the men in masks behind the scenes, but we don't even see them this season. And again, if we're talking structurally, I think it would have helped if they had at least had some kind of presence that would have helped carry his motivation throughout the entire second season and not just going into Squid Game 3. Episode 3 finally put us back in the game, and I liked adding the twist that the players not only vote after the end of each round, but that the remaining players get to split whatever money has been earned so far. It adds a lot of complexity to the group dynamics, even more rivalry between them, and it eventually allows them to split into two different factions. And it really makes more sense to the game itself that the players would vote this way and decide about splitting the money, because we're talking about a group of mainly or largely degenerate gamblers. And so, of course, they're going to be a little bit more inclined to get into the sunk cost fallacy and to say, one more game, I can make it one more game. It just adds a whole new wrinkle to everything. And I think that this is an example of a change that's made to a show between seasons on a writing level that actually makes the show better and adds an extra layer of intrigue. The third episode also introduces us to a lot of the main characters, including the big bad of this season / half season, at least among the players, Thanos the Rapper. I really hated this guy. He was a great mix of arrogance, ignorance, and just being a straight up psychopath. And it wasn't too hard to believe that he'd be the kind of guy who held crypto for too long, lost everything, and then blamed the guy who invented the coin. Because I'm not really plugged into the K-pop scene, I also didn't know until after the show when I was researching all the actors that Thanos was played by an actual Korean rapper named either Top or T.O.P. That's how unconnected I am. But I think he did a great job because you do need somebody to hate, I think, in the group of players, and he certainly provided that. When it comes to the games, of course, you have to bring back the red light, green light game, and I liked Gi-hun's field general role as he tried to guide everyone to safety, and he would have gotten away with it too if it weren't for those meddling bees. Bees?
Beads.
Beads?
Job's not on board.
And the episode ends with the reveal that the frontman himself, Inho, brother of Junho, who shot him and left him for dead in the ocean, is secretly in the game as player number 001 and casts the deciding vote to continue the game. I still have no clue why he put himself in the game or why he helped everyone until the end when he decided to betray everyone and take his role back. But I thought that it was a great twist and a great way to end that episode, and it does add a little bit of intrigue going into Squid Game 3. Lee Jung-jae, as always, was great throughout the season, and I loved him in this episode as he tries to convince the players not to continue the game. Episode 4 is where I definitively realized we were not going to get a full season here, because just past the halfway point, we were just getting into the second game, six-leg pentathlon. I'm glad they didn't repeat all the same games, and I actually liked the new ones they came up with this year. Having 5 minutes to complete 5 mini-games as a team added some tension, as each team member had life or death pressure on their shoulders. We also met Dae-ho this episode, who claimed to be a former Marine. It seems obvious by the end of the season that he isn't, which I suspected, but I have no idea what's really going on with them. And we also get a return to the organ harvesting among the guards storyline. Noel is sabotaging their efforts for reasons I guess we'll learn about later. I've got to be honest, Noel and her story, and honestly a lot of the secondary stories, had better be pretty important to the end game of the series as a whole, because if they're not, I think once we get to the end of Squid Game 3, I'm really going to start to wonder why we couldn't have just wrapped everything up in one season instead of having to split it into 2 seasons. If you have a huge story intricately connected to everything, I can somewhat forgive the fact that it's just kind of chopped in half. But if it really is just stuff that's added as filler to make the episodes longer, then I think you really need to look at the writing process and what's really important in your storytelling. It should be noted that throughout the season, Junho is on a boat with a strike squad searching for Gi-hun and the island to continue a rescue operation. This storyline honestly could have been an email, and they're literally adrift and even totally ignored in some episodes. I guess the cliffhanger with them is that the captain of the boat is in on it in some way, which I kind of guessed, but totally superfluous really to this season, and I guess we get to see it next time on them as well. Episode 5 featured the conclusion of the pentathlon, and like I said, I can think that the whole season is half-baked and frustrating and still acknowledge that there are great parts because all the game sequences were very well done and suspenseful. They kept me on the edge of my seat. I liked the little band of 5 outcasts succeeding where others have failed, and even Gi-hun's group was nerve-wracking, even though I knew that there was a 0% chance that the show was going to kill off both its main hero and its main villain at the same time. I am still unsure why Inho was sabotaging his own team, seemingly with the top towards the end, and very likely got them all killed. Squid Game 3, once again, I suppose we'll have the answers to that. Episode 5 also takes us deeper into Funju's story. Funju is a trans woman who's kicked out of the army and disowned by her family after coming out as trans. Now, I've seen controversy on a couple of different sides regarding this character. First of all, from the usual suspects who just aren't particularly happy that there's a trans character in Squid Game or in any movie or show, really. And also from the trans community, who are not particularly happy, some people in the community at least, that a straight cisgender male actor was cast to play this part. Now, I can't speak to that because that is a discussion from people in the trans community who have their own perspectives, and understandably so. But I can give my opinion just on a storytelling level, which is that I liked this character. I think that she was given a very heartfelt, relatable human story, and also a lot of agency as the main rallier of the troops during the uprising using her army training. Of course, that's just how I see it from my perspective. Everyone's free to share their own. Naturally, we have no idea what's become of Funju at the end of this season and have to wait until Squid Game 3 to see if she will pay the price for helping to lead this insurrection. Episode 5 ends and episode 6 begins with the introduction of the third game, Mingle, where the contestants stand on a rotating platform until it stops and they're told to divide into an unknown group size and run into small rooms on the outside of the circle. I thought this was a very creative game and also a great way to explore the social dynamics between all the characters, who gets left out, who gets included. This is the last big game that we see this season, and I think that they were all top-notch. Hopefully, Squid Game isn't moving towards Saw territory where the games/traps aren't the most memorable thing about each installment. The decision on whether or not to end the game after Mingle ends in a tie, which leads to 2 equal factions feuding and eventually killing each other to try to tip the balance in their favor before the next vote. And honestly, I really, really liked this part of the season. And thinking back on the way it's structured, I think that it may have been just as interesting to not have Gi-hun back in the game itself. You could have the game played out. You could meet the new characters. You could even have player 001, the front man, inserting himself back into the game. But let's say Junho and Gi-hun are on a boat trying to find the island. The ticking clock is trying to save people from the game, and it's 2 parallel storylines. I think that that could have been just as compelling, maybe a little bit simpler and more straightforward. I think that Gi-hun was put back in the game just because people wanted to see him back in the game. You got the familiarity and transitioning to the new characters, but at the same time, I don't know. I think that could have solved some of the structural issues that the season faced. The episode ends with the death of Thanos at the hands of MG Coin, the very crypto influencer who he blamed for losing all of his money. The story of MG Coin and his pregnant ex-girlfriend would also have been more compelling if the players' storylines weren't sharing real estate with Gi-hun and whatever his plan is, but, the die's been cast as far as that goes. Episode 7 featured all-out warfare as the players who want to continue playing attack those who want to leave, while Gi-hun uses the guards coming in to break up the fight as an opportunity to launch his revolution. This was a really well-done action episode, and I was hoping it would lead to some sort of satisfactory conclusion to this half of the story, but alas, it did not. The season ends with Inho resuming his role as the front man and betraying his fellow players unbeknownst to Gi-hun, and the price of the failed rebellion is the life of Gi-hun's friend Jung Bae. And that's really where we leave things. There are still a handful of players that are left in the game, mostly the ones that we've gotten to know over the course of the season. Gi-hun is in the clutches of the game managers, not knowing that he's been betrayed by what he thought was his closest ally in the game. There's something going on with one of the guards, and we really don't know where any of this is going. Ultimately, I think that my opinion and a lot of people's opinion on this season is a little transitory, because if you were to watch this show in 3 years and be able to just start Squid Game 3 where Squid Game 2 leaves off, then I think that you might have a different opinion because there isn't that delay or that frustration of waiting over 3 years for a second season, only for that to be really half a season with a lot of stuff in it that you're not really sure why it's there. It's similar to how I described my experience watching the TV show Lost, because I watched it as it was originally airing, and it was a show that in many ways was more frustrating for me because some of the narrative dead ends meant that you had to wait a week between episodes, kind of frustrated and left hanging, versus somebody that just binge watches it and says, well, it's a really great show because you didn't have to wait between episodes, you didn't have to wait between seasons, and so you do have a different experience with the story. So if I was going to rate Squid Game Season 2, I would say it's good because it continues to be a very compelling show with great acting and some really well-designed games and sets, but that opinion could go up or down based on what happens in Squid Game 3. If Squid Game 3 ends in a disappointing way, well, Squid Game 2 is just the first half of that story, so my opinion of it would go down. If Squid Game 3 is really satisfying, same thing. Squid Game 2 is just the first half of that story, so it would go up. But as a self-contained season, it was somewhat of a disappointment because there really wasn't an attempt to do that split. Inside of that were a lot of the things that made the first season great, including Lee Jung-jae in the lead. He is a really, really good actor. And the fact that they didn't just replicate the games. I liked the design. Technically, it's still a very well-made show, and we will see what the overall opinion on Squid Game is, whether I will vote to stop or continue my fandom after we see season 3 sometime in 2025. So those are my thoughts on Squid Game 2. What do you think? Were you satisfied by the season, even though it left a lot of things hanging? Let me know down in the comments below. And before we go, I want to thank the sponsor for this review. This video is brought to you by The Perfect Gene. All right, we are past the moment of last-minute gift shopping. We're in emergency mode. Christmas may have even passed by the time you hear this. Maybe you didn't have time. Maybe the people on your list were tough to buy for. Listen, this isn't a place of holiday judgment, but it's not too late to give the gift of amazing jeans with The Perfect Gene. The Perfect Gene makes what is now my favorite pair of jeans, and I did buy them as holiday gifts this year because I want my loved ones to have a pair as well. They're stretchy and comfortable, but still look great for every occasion, and they come in 6 fits with waists from 26 to 50 and lengths from 26 to 38. So no matter who you haven't scratched off your list yet, there will be a size for them. I did laundry the other day and dug through my jeans to make sure that I got my perfect jeans to take on my holiday road trip with me. These are not jeans that sit on my shelf. These are the first ones I pick out every single time. I've done long flights, I've done long drives, and every time I've been comfortable throughout. They're great for sitting, standing, running, you name it. It's finally time to stop putting up with uncomfortable jeans by going to theperfectgene.nyc, and viewers and listeners of the show get 15% off of your first order, plus free shipping, free returns, and free exchanges when you use the code DAN15 at checkout. That's 15% for new customers at theperfectgene.nyc with promo code DAN15. After you purchase, they're going to ask you where you heard about them, so please support the show and tell them that I sent you. F your khakis and get the perfect gene. Thanks to The Perfect Gene for sponsoring this review, and thank you for watching. Be sure to stay tuned right here on the channel. I've got a lot of stuff in the next several days. A look at the Christmas weekend box office, my recap of my favorite movies of 2024, and a preview of 2025. So make sure that you subscribe, hit the bell, all that stuff to make sure you know when my new videos are coming out. But most of all, thank you for spending time with me on this video. Until next time, stay safe, and I'll see you then. Bye.